For 8 years, as Princess Diana navigated the storm of global fame and private turmoil, one man stood as her professional anchor, Patrick Jephson. As her private secretary from 1988 to 1996, the former naval officer was the ultimate insider, the chief of staff who witnessed the stark reality behind the fairy tale facade. This is the story of the man who managed the War of the Waleses from ground zero, but it's defined by two critical moments. First, his shocking resignation on principle, a direct result of Diana's secret bombshell interview with the BBC's Panorama. Second, the firestorm he ignited by writing a tell-all memoir, Shadows of a Princess, which led many to brand him a traitor. Through his eyes, we'll explore the complex dynamic between duty and loyalty, and ask the central question: was Patrick Jephson a steadfast servant who sought to tell the truth, or did he betray the woman he was hired to protect? Patrick Jephson's story does not begin in the hushed, carpeted corridors of Buckingham Palace. It begins with the sharp scent of salt spray and the cold, hard reality of naval steel. Born in 1956, his formative years were defined by the rigid, hierarchical, and deeply principled world of the Royal Navy. This isn't just a biographical footnote. It is the absolute key to understanding the man. To be a naval officer for over a decade is to be shaped by a specific code of conduct. It's a world of clear orders, of unwavering duty to crown and country, and of a particular brand of stoicism where personal feelings are secondary to the mission at hand. Discretion isn't just a virtue, it's a professional necessity. He was, by all accounts, an exemplary officer. He served with distinction, his career taking him across the world's oceans. He even served for a time aboard the Royal Yacht Britannia, that floating symbol of the monarchy itself, a place where royal protocol and naval precision merged seamlessly. This experience gave him his first real proximity to the royal family, but from a respectful operational distance. He was part of the machinery that made the monarchy function, but he was not yet inside the engine room. His next posting brought him closer still, as his duties involved providing direct support to Prince Andrew, the Duke of York. While not his formally appointed equerry, this role was in essence that of a military personal assistant to a senior royal, a role that demands immaculate organization, social grace, and the ability to be ever present, yet entirely invisible. It was in this capacity that his competence, his calm demeanor, and his unimpeachable discretion were noted by the palace's senior staff. And by 1988, the office of the Princess of Wales was in desperate need of a steady hand. Diana's private life was becoming increasingly fraught, and her public life was exploding. Her workload, her correspondence, her global profile, it was all expanding at a dizzying rate. She needed more than a diary manager. She needed a chief of staff. She needed someone who could build a professional, efficient structure around her, someone who could strategize, prioritize, and most importantly, protect her. The man they chose was Patrick Jephson. It was a fascinating choice. He wasn't from the traditional aristocratic pool of courtiers. He was a professional serviceman, a meritocratic appointment. He represented competence over connections. For Diana, who often felt suffocated by the stuffy old guard establishment, this likely appealed. Here was a man of action, not of gossip, a man of substance, not of title. When Jephson took the job, stepping into his office at Kensington Palace, he entered a world that was, in almost every conceivable way, the antithesis of a naval warship. The lines of command were blurry, driven by mood and emotion as much as by logic. The mission was not to patrol a coastline, but to manage the image and soul of the most famous woman on earth. His first task was to bring a semblance of order to the chaos. He inherited an office drowning in mail, thousands of letters a week from an adoring public, and a diary that was a whirlwind of disjointed, often conflicting engagements. His initial years were focused on professionalizing Team Diana. He streamlined her schedule, ensuring her public appearances had maximum impact. He built a small, fiercely loyal team around her. He insisted on meticulous preparation for every engagement, every tour. This is one of the less discussed but crucial aspects of his tenure. We often focus on the drama, but Jephson's early contribution was to provide Diana with the professional framework she needed to truly flourish as a humanitarian. He helped transform her raw empathy into a focused, strategic force for good. He quickly learned that Diana was far from a passive clothes horse, as some of her detractors liked to paint her. She was sharp, intuitive, and possessed a startlingly astute understanding of the media. Jephson would recall in his memoirs the intensity of their briefing sessions. She would absorb vast quantities of information, ask probing, insightful questions, and often come up with her own angles, her own ideas for how to make a visit more meaningful. She didn't want to just be shown a project. She wanted to meet the people on the ground, to hear their stories, to sit with them, to touch them. Jephson's job was to make that happen, often pushing back against the security concerns and stiff protocols of host nations or the palace itself. He was her enabler, the logistical brain that powered her emotional intelligence. For example, on a royal tour, the official schedule might call for a brief, formal visit to a hospital. Jephson would work behind the scenes to ensure that Diana had unscheduled time away from the main press pack to sit with terminally ill patients, to hold their hands, and to listen. He understood that these were the moments that mattered to her, the moments that fueled her. He saw that her connection wasn't a performance. It was her very essence. But as he was building this professional fortress around her, he could not ignore the cracks appearing in the foundations of her private life. He was a witness to the profound growing chasm between the Prince and Princess of Wales. He saw the separate itineraries, the stilted public appearances, the palpable tension that filled a room when they were together. While his role was strictly professional, the nature of his job meant he was privy to her shifting moods, her moments of deep sadness, her flashes of frustration. He wasn't her therapist or her confessor, but he was the constant, steady presence in her daily life. He was the one she saw first thing in the morning to go over the day's plans, and the last person she spoke to at night to debrief. An anecdote from these early years paints a vivid picture. During one particularly grueling overseas tour, the official schedule was relentless. The media scrutiny was at its peak, and the pressure on Diana was immense. Late one evening, after a full day of engagements, Jephson was in his hotel room working on the next day's logistics when the phone rang. It was the princess. Her voice was quiet, exhausted. She wasn't calling to complain or to change the schedule. She was calling to ask him if he thought the day had gone well, if he felt they had done some good. It was a moment of vulnerability, a glimpse behind the curtain. She wasn't just seeking professional feedback, she was seeking human reassurance. For Jephson, the man of rigid structures and clear objectives, these moments were a profound education in the complexities of his new commander. His mission was no longer just about logistics. It was about managing the morale and indeed the spirit of his principle. He was beginning to understand that his loyalty was not just to the institution of the monarchy or the title of Princess of Wales. His duty was increasingly focused on the complex, brilliant, and deeply lonely woman he served. The professional relationship was, out of necessity, becoming a personal one. He was becoming her protector, not just from the press, but from the crushing isolation of her own life. The coming years would test that loyalty to its absolute limit as the private sadness began to spill out into the public domain, threatening to become a torrent that would sweep them all away. The role of private secretary was about to be redefined, and Patrick Jephson was standing at ground zero just as the first tremors began to shake the foundations of the House of Windsor. The tremors Patrick Jephson felt beneath the polished floors of Kensington Palace were not imaginary. By the early 1990s, the carefully constructed facade of the Waleses' marriage was fracturing under immense pressure, and the private sorrow was beginning to seep through the cracks, staining the public image of the monarchy itself. Jephson, the man tasked with maintaining order, found himself on the front line of a conflict he could not control, armed only with a diary, a telephone, and his own unwavering sense of duty. The era of quiet management was over. The era of crisis management was about to begin. The seismic event that would irrevocably shatter the royal landscape and fundamentally change Patrick Jephson's role was not a state dinner or a foreign tour. It was a book. Specifically, Andrew Morton's Diana, Her True Story, published in June 1992. But long before the book hit the shelves, the conspiracy to create it cast a long, strange shadow over the household Jephson managed. He began to notice a change in the atmosphere. There was a new level of secrecy to the princess's phone calls, clandestine meetings with people Jephson didn't recognize, and an air of nervous energy that even Diana's famous charm couldn't quite conceal. As her private secretary, Jephson was the gatekeeper. His entire professional function was predicated on knowing who the princess was meeting, what was being discussed, and how it fit into the broader strategy of her public life. Yet he was now sensing a hidden parallel operation running right under his nose, and he was deliberately, pointedly, being kept out of the loop. Imagine the psychological toll of that. For a man like Jephson, steeped in the naval tradition of a clear chain of command and absolute transparency with your superior officer, this was anathema. It was a profound professional slight. He was managing Diana's official life with military precision, while she was simultaneously orchestrating the single, most explosive act of her royal career in total secrecy. The book was being created through a series of taped confessions, smuggled out of the palace by an intermediary. It was an operation of subterfuge and plausible deniability, and its very existence was a betrayal of the trust he believed was central to their working relationship. When the first serializations of the book appeared in the newspapers, the effect was cataclysmic. The carefully veiled allusions to unhappiness were gone, replaced by raw, detailed accounts of a lonely, desperate woman, her struggles with bulimia, her suicide attempts, her anguish over her husband's relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles. It was a declaration of war, not just on Prince Charles, but on the entire silent, unfeeling institution of the monarchy that Diana felt had abandoned her. And Patrick Jephson was caught in the crossfire. His office was besieged. The world's media was in a frenzy, and the palace was in lockdown. He had to field frantic calls from Buckingham Palace, from the government, from everyone, all demanding answers. His primary role in those first few days and weeks was to manage the official denial. Publicly, the story was that Diana had not cooperated with the book, that these were merely the wild speculations of a sensationalist author. Jephson had to orchestrate this strategy, knowing, or at the very least, strongly suspecting, that it was a lie. He was forced to compromise his own integrity to protect a princess who had not afforded him the courtesy of her trust on the matter. It was an excruciatingly difficult position, a trial by fire for his loyalty. Yet, in a strange and contradictory way, The Morton book crisis forged an even stronger, more intense bond between them. In the bunker of Kensington Palace, with the world exploding outside, Diana had fewer and fewer people she could turn to. Jephson, despite his private feelings about how the book had been handled, remained a steadfast, calming presence. He didn't lecture or recriminate. He managed the fallout. He fielded the attacks. He got on with the job. In the aftermath, Diana's reliance on him deepened. He was no longer just the organizer. He was the conciliaire, the one man who understood the strategic landscape and could offer dispassionate, professional advice in a world consumed by emotion and betrayal. Their relationship entered a new phase, a kind of foxhole friendship forged under extreme duress. The official response from the monarchy was slow but decisive. The Morton book had made the private situation untenable. The pretense could no longer be maintained. So, in December of 1992, Prime Minister John Major stood before the House of Commons and announced the formal separation of the Prince and Princess of Wales. The fairy tale was officially over. For Patrick Jephson, this announcement was another professional earthquake. He was now the private secretary to a separated Princess of Wales, a constitutional role for which there was no precedent, no rulebook, no guide. He had to, in effect, invent the job as he went along. His task was to carve out a meaningful and dignified public role for Diana, independent of her husband, yet still under the umbrella of the monarchy. It was a diplomatic and political minefield. Every engagement, every charity patronage, every public statement was now subject to intense negotiation with Buckingham Palace. Jephson found himself in endless meetings with the Queen's private secretary and other senior courtiers, essentially acting as Diana's chief negotiator and ambassador. The palace naturally wanted to contain the situation, to manage Diana's activities, and limit any potential for further embarrassment. Jephson, acting on Diana's instructions, had to push for her autonomy, for her right to continue her humanitarian work on her own terms. He was fighting for her relevance, arguing that her unique connection with the public was a massive asset to the country, and indeed the monarchy, if they were wise enough to use it. This period was marked by a series of grueling, attritional battles fought behind the scenes. It was a courtier's game of chess, and Jephson was playing for the highest stakes. His naval training proved invaluable. He was strategic, patient, and unflappable under pressure. He meticulously prepared his arguments, marshaled his facts, and calmly but firmly advocated for his principal's position. He helped Diana to professionalize her own operation, creating what was essentially a separate, independent royal court at Kensington Palace. Just as they were navigating the fallout from the Morton book and the separation, they were hit by another deeply personal and humiliating attack. In August 1992, the Squidgygate tapes were published, recordings of an intimate phone call between Diana and a close friend, James Gilby. This was followed not long after by the Camilla-gate tapes, an equally embarrassing recording of a conversation between Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles. It was a new, ugly low in the War of the Waleses. The public was now privy to the most intimate, private moments of their lives. For Diana, the humiliation was acute. For Jephson, it was another crisis to manage. It reinforced the sense of being under siege, that there were no safe spaces, no private lines of communication. The violation was profound. His role as protector now extended to trying to shore up her morale in the face of such a vicious personal attack. He saw firsthand the emotional toll it took on her, the feeling of being hunted and exposed. Yet through it all, she had to continue her public duties, to step out of the car, smile for the cameras, and comfort the sick, all while her own private pain was being laid bare for the world to see. Jephson witnessed this extraordinary resilience up close, a quiet observer of the immense personal strength that lay beneath her public fragility. By the end of 1993, Diana was exhausted by the constant media intrusion, the battles with the palace, and the emotional strain of her new, isolated life. She decided she needed to take a step back, to regain some control over her own narrative. In December of that year, at a charity lunch, she delivered a speech that stunned the world. With Jephson's likely strategic input on the logistics, but with the emotional words coming entirely from her, she announced her withdrawal from public life. She spoke of her desire for time and space, and her hope that she could find a more private, peaceful way to live. It was a bold move, a gamble designed to call the media's bluff. The intention was to starve the beast of its prey, to make them see that their relentless pursuit was hounding her out of the very work the public admired her for. Jephson's job was to manage the practicalities of this withdrawal, winding down her diary and handling the official communications. But even as he did so, both he and Diana must have known it was an impossible request. She was too famous, too beloved, too central to the national conversation to simply disappear. The withdrawal was, ultimately, short-lived and unsuccessful. The media's appetite was unabated. If anything, her retreat made her an even more tantalizing target. The experience taught them a harsh lesson. For Diana, there was no escape. There was no private life left to retreat to. Her only path forward was to redefine her public role, to seize control of it with even more determination. The battle was far from over. In fact, the proxy wars fought through books, and secret tapes were coming to an end. The next phase of the conflict would be fought out in the open, face-to-face on television screens in front of millions of viewers. And it would change everything, not just for the monarchy, but for the unique, intense, and increasingly fragile relationship between the princess and her private secretary. In the strange, suspended reality of their official separation, the Prince and Princess of Wales were like two boxers in their corners, waiting for the bell to ring for the next round. The proxy wars, fought through sympathetic biographers and leaked telephone calls, had left both sides bloodied but still standing. Patrick Jephson, now the seasoned manager in Diana's corner, had spent the past year helping her build a new identity, a new purpose. But they both knew the truce was temporary. The monarchy, and Prince Charles in particular, felt an urgent need to reclaim the narrative, to present his side of the story. The chosen medium was television, and the chosen man was the veteran broadcaster, Jonathan Dimbleby. The announcement of Prince Charles's interview with Dimbleby, scheduled for June 1994, sent a shock wave through Kensington Palace. This was a move of unprecedented scale. A future king was about to sit down and discuss the intimate details of his failed marriage with the nation. For Jephson and his team, this was a direct challenge. They went into a state of high alert, preparing for the inevitable fallout. They knew that whatever Charles said, Diana would be judged by her response. The question was, how should she respond? Should she issue a statement? Should she retreat from the public eye? The day the interview aired, a tense, watchful quiet fell over Diana's apartments. Jephson would have been in constant communication, managing the press, preparing contingency plans. The interview itself was a carefully managed piece of royal rehabilitation, but it contained one devastating admission. When Dimbleby asked Charles if he had been faithful and honorable to his wife, the prince hesitated before admitting that he had been, until the marriage had irretrievably broken down, us both having tried. It was a confession of adultery, broadcast to an audience of millions. The abstract rumors had just been confirmed by the man himself. At that moment, Prince Charles handed Princess Diana a weapon of immense power. And she, with an instinct for public relations that was nothing short of genius, knew exactly how to use it. Her response would not be a press release drafted by Jephson. It would not be a tearful counter-interview. That evening, as her husband's confession was being broadcast, Diana was scheduled to attend a fundraising dinner at the Serpentine gallery. The press were, of course, gathered outside, expecting to see a wounded, humiliated woman. Jephson would have been part of the logistical planning for the evening, a routine engagement that had suddenly become the most important public appearance of her life. What happened next has become legendary. Diana emerged from her car, not in a demure, conservative outfit, but in a daring, off-the-shoulder, form-fitting black cocktail dress by Christina Stambolian. It was a dress that broke royal protocol in every conceivable way. It was black, usually reserved for mourning. It was short, it was bold, it was unapologetically sexy. She looked radiant, defiant, and utterly magnificent. The next day's newspapers were unanimous. Charles's interview was relegated to the inside pages. The front pages all belonged to Diana and what instantly became known as the revenge dress. Patrick Jephson witnessed this masterstroke firsthand. He saw a woman who, instead of playing the victim, seized the narrative and turned her personal pain into a public spectacle of strength and defiance. She hadn't said a word, but her message was deafeningly clear. I am not broken. I am free, and you have lost this. For Jephson, the strategist, it must have been a moment of profound admiration for her sheer nerve and her innate understanding of symbolic power. It was a turning point. Diana had weathered her husband's biggest salvo and had emerged not just unscathed, but more powerful, more popular, and more independent than ever before. In the year that followed, Jephson helped her harness this new momentum. This was arguably the zenith of their professional partnership. With the public firmly on her side, they set about crafting a truly global presidential-style role for her. She was no longer just a British princess. She was a humanitarian superstar. Jephson's meticulous planning and strategic vision were crucial. He organized a series of high-impact international tours that cemented her status as the Queen of Hearts. She traveled to Japan, Argentina, and famously to Angola with the Red Cross to raise awareness for their campaign against landmines. These weren't simple royal tours. They were quasi-diplomatic missions, planned with military precision by Jephson. He managed the complex logistics, the security, the delicate negotiations with foreign governments, and the global media strategy. The images from that Angolan trip, Diana walking through a partially cleared minefield comforting child amputees, were extraordinarily powerful. She was using her fame for a cause that was dangerous, politically sensitive, and profoundly important. Jephson was the architect behind the scenes, ensuring that her compassion was channeled into effective, world-changing action. This was the vision they had fought for, a modern, independent princess making a tangible difference on the world stage. For a time, it seemed they had found the perfect working equilibrium. But the fragile peace was not to last. As Diana's star ascended, so did her desire for complete control over her own story. And a new, ambitious figure was entering the orbit of Kensington Palace, the BBC journalist, Martin Bashir. Just as with the Andrew Morton book, Jephson began to sense a familiar pattern of secrecy. There were hushed phone calls and mysterious appointments in the princess's diary with a man Jephson did not know. Once again, he was being deliberately excluded from a major development in her life. What he didn't know at the time, and what the world would only learn decades later, was the depth of the deception Bashir was using to gain Diana's trust. The journalist was feeding her paranoia, allegedly forging bank statements to prove that her staff, including Jephson himself, were being paid by the security services to spy on her. He was isolating her from her trusted advisors, creating an atmosphere of suspicion where he could present himself as her only true ally, the only one willing to help her tell her truth. Diana, emotionally vulnerable and increasingly convinced she was being systematically undermined by the establishment, fell for it. She agreed to a secret tell-all television interview, an act that would be the royal equivalent of deploying a nuclear weapon. The first Patrick Jephson knew of it for certain was when the BBC began trailing a major exclusive interview with the Princess of Wales. He was utterly blindsided. It was a repeat of the Morton affair, but infinitely more devastating. A book could be denied. A television interview broadcast to the world was irrefutable. It was a complete and total circumvention of his role. He was her private secretary, her chief advisor on all matters of public communication. For her to orchestrate an interview of this magnitude without his knowledge was not just an oversight. It was a fundamental breach of the professional trust upon which their entire relationship was built. On the 20th of November, 1995, Jephson, along with 23 million other people in Britain, sat down to watch the Panorama interview. He watched as the woman he had served and protected for 7 years spoke with devastating candor about the monarchy, her depression, and her husband's infidelity, uttering the now immortal line, "Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." She questioned Prince Charles's suitability to be king and positioned herself as the queen of people's hearts. For Jephson, watching the broadcast was a moment of profound crisis. It wasn't about the content. He knew her feelings. He had lived through her pain with her. It was about the act itself. It was a unilateral decision that shattered the entire strategy of careful, professional negotiation they had built. It was a rejection of his advice, his methods, and his entire professional ethos. His job was to manage her relationship with the public and the palace through controlled strategic means. This was an uncontrolled emotional detonation. It was an act of self-sabotage that he, as her advisor, could not condone or defend. His duty, as he saw it, was to serve the princess and the long-term interests of the crown. In his professional judgment, this interview catastrophically damaged both. He had built his career on a foundation of loyalty, discretion, and a strict code of conduct. He could not in good conscience continue to serve a principal who had so flagrantly disregarded the very principles of their working relationship. The trust was irrevocably broken. Shortly after the broadcast, Patrick Jephson tendered his resignation. It was the end of an 8-year partnership that had seen them through crises, triumphs, and profound transformations. The final conversations must have been filled with a deep and painful sadness. This wasn't the acrimonious departure of a disgruntled employee. It was the principled stand of a man who felt he could no longer effectively do his job. He was a navigator whose captain had deliberately chosen to steer the ship directly into a storm, ignoring all warnings. He could do nothing more. He walked out of Kensington Palace for the last time in January 1996, leaving behind 8 years of his life, and a princess now set on a course he could no longer help her navigate. The most successful partnership of her royal career was over. The consequences of its dissolution for both of them were just beginning. When Patrick Jephson walked away from Kensington Palace in January 1996, he left a vacuum. It was not just a professional void in the office of the Princess of Wales. It was the absence of a steadying strategic presence that had, for 8 years, been her anchor. In the 19 months that followed, Diana, now free from the constraints of both her marriage and the professional counsel that had guided her, charted a new, more independent, and some would say more perilous, course. Without Jephson's meticulous planning and his buffer against the outside world, she became more reliant on a circle of friends and advisors who were perhaps less equipped to handle the immense pressures of her global fame. This final, vibrant period of her life, marked by her passionate campaign against landmines and her burgeoning new romance, was also a time of increased vulnerability. The professional shield was gone. To understand the magnitude of what was lost, we must look deeper at the unique, almost unclassifiable relationship between the princess and her private secretary. It was not a friendship in the conventional sense. Jephson himself was always clear about this. There was a protocol, a hierarchy, that was ever present. He was the servant of the crown, her employee. Yet the extraordinary circumstances they shared forged a bond of profound professional intimacy. He later described it as a foxhole friendship, a connection born of shared danger and mutual reliance in a prolonged siege. For 8 years, he was one of the few constants in her turbulent life. He was a keeper of secrets, not of gossip, but of the logistical and emotional realities of her existence. He knew her schedule, her charitable passions, her private anxieties, and her public triumphs. He saw her at her most dazzling, captivating world leaders, and comforting the dying with equal grace. He also saw her in moments of profound private distress, the tears after a difficult phone call, the quiet frustration at a perceived slight from the palace, the sheer exhaustion from living under the relentless gaze of the world's media. The emotional toll on Jephson himself must have been immense. His life was not his own. It was lived by the rhythms of her diary, by the ringing of a telephone at any hour of the day or night. He absorbed the stress of her world, acting as a lightning rod for the pressures that rained down on her. To maintain his naval calm, his professional dispassion, while navigating such a deeply emotional landscape, required a level of self-control that is difficult to comprehend. He was, in his own words, the boiler-suited mechanic whose job was to keep the beautiful, priceless machine running no matter what was happening in the engine room. This unique proximity makes his perspective invaluable, but also deeply complex. He saw the Diana that few others did, the disciplined professional, the sharp-witted boss, the strategic thinker. He admired her immensely, not for her beauty or her title, but for her work ethic and her almost supernatural ability to connect with people. Yet he was also a witness to her flaws, her insecurities, and her capacity for making impulsive, self-destructive decisions. Their relationship was a constant negotiation between his structured, cautious approach and her intuitive, often emotionally driven one. For years, they found a way to make that dynamic work, creating a formidable partnership. The Panorama interview marked the moment when those two approaches became irreconcilable. His departure was, therefore, not just the end of a job, it was the painful conclusion of the most significant and defining relationship of his professional life. In the years following Diana's tragic death in 1997, a wave of grief and adulation swept the globe, cementing her image as a secular saint. It was in this emotionally charged atmosphere that Patrick Jephson made a decision that would define his own legacy. He decided to write a book. When Shadows of a Princess was published in 2000, it was met with a chorus of condemnation. The man who had built his reputation on discretion was now telling all. He was immediately accused of the ultimate betrayal, cashing in on the memory of a woman who could no longer defend herself or give her consent. To many, it was an unforgivable breach of trust, a violation of the sacred bond between a royal and their most senior aide. The criticism was and remains fierce. It centers on a fundamental ethical question. Where does loyalty end? Does the duty of silence extend beyond resignation, beyond even death? Those who condemn the book argue that it does. They see Jephson as just another in a long line of people who exploited their connection to Diana for personal gain, selling her secrets and diminishing her mystique. However, Jephson and his defenders present a powerful counter-argument. He has consistently maintained that his primary motive was not profit, but truth. He felt that in the years after her death, the real Diana, the complex, intelligent, hard-working, and sometimes difficult woman he knew, was being lost, replaced by a one-dimensional saintly myth. He believed he had a duty as a first-hand historical witness to provide a more balanced and nuanced account. His goal, he argued, was to show her as a professional, to detail the immense work and meticulous preparation that went into her humanitarian efforts, a side of her that was often overlooked in the focus on her private life and her fashion. He wasn't trying to tear down the icon, but to reveal the formidable human being who had created it. The book is not a sensationalist expose. It is a measured, detailed, and often deeply admiring account of her professional life, albeit one that does not shy away from the difficulties of working for her. It paints a portrait of a boss who could be both inspiringly brilliant and maddeningly unpredictable, a woman of great strength and profound vulnerability, and the passage of time has cast the central controversy of his career, his resignation over the Panorama interview, in a new light. For decades, his decision was seen by some as a stuffy establishment reaction to Diana finally speaking her truth. But in 2021, the Dyson inquiry delivered a damning verdict on the methods used by Martin Bashir, confirming that the journalist had used deceit and forged documents to gain Diana's trust. This revelation was a stunning vindication of Jephson's position. It proved his instincts were correct. The interview was secured unethically, and Diana's paranoia was being actively manipulated. His resignation was not just a reaction to a breach of protocol. It was a reaction to a situation that he rightly sensed was deeply corrupt and dangerous for the princess. The controversy over his book remains, but the historical justification for the principled stand that led to his departure is now undeniable. So, why does the story of Patrick Jephson still resonate? Because his journey offers a unique and indispensable lens through which to understand the enduring legacy of Diana and the evolution of the modern monarchy. His 8 years of service coincided with the most transformative period of her life, and his account provides a crucial humanizing element to a story often told in mythic proportions. His narrative forces us to look beyond the simplistic portrayals of Diana as either a saint or a sinner. Through his eyes, we see a three-dimensional woman, a brilliant media operator, a dedicated humanitarian, a loving mother, and a complex boss wrestling with immense pressures. This nuanced portrait is perhaps his most important contribution to history. It gives depth and agency to Diana, reminding us that her global impact was not an accident of fame, but the result of hard work, strategic thinking, and genuine compassion. Furthermore, the story of their partnership and its eventual dissolution serves as a powerful case study in the clash between tradition and modernity within the monarchy. Jephson, the disciplined traditionalist, and Diana, the emotional modernist, represented the two forces pulling at the institution. The painful dramas of the 1990s, which Jephson witnessed from the very center, were a crucible that forced the royal family to change. The lessons learned about public relations, media management, and the need for a more empathetic connection with the public, lessons Diana taught them all, often brutally, have shaped the monarchy we see today. The more professional, media-savvy operations of the younger royals are, in many ways, built upon the ruins of the chaotic War of the Waleses. Ultimately, Patrick Jephson's story is a profound cautionary tale. It's about the corrosive nature of relentless public scrutiny, the impossible tightrope walked by those who serve in the shadow of fame, and the tragic consequences when trust breaks down. It teaches us about the complexities of loyalty, the price of integrity, and the enduring human need for a life of purpose. In the end, Patrick Jephson remains a figure defined by his proximity to an icon. He was the silent witness, the steadfast adjutant, the man in the background of 1,000 photographs. But his story is more than just a footnote. It is a deeply human narrative of duty, loyalty, and the agonizing moment when those two principles come into conflict. He served the Princess of Wales with a professionalism and dedication that helped her become the global force we remember. And he left her side out of that same sense of professionalism when he felt he could no longer protect her from a path she was determined to walk alone. His memoir, controversial as it may be, provides a vital service. It pulls Diana back from the mists of myth and reminds us of the formidable, flawed, and brilliant woman she truly was. Patrick Jephson's journey into and out of the royal crucible is not a tale of betrayal, but a quieter, more complex story of a man who upheld his own code of honor in the face of an impossible situation. He was the shadow of a princess, but his story casts its own long, illuminating light, compelling us to see the history we thought we knew with fresh and far more truthful eyes.